One, one, two, three. One, two, three. You can hear me? Yeah, I bet you can. Well, it's time now. Good evening, everyone. My name is João. I'm going to make a less technological presentation than the rest of the lot, which is Trello and Agile teams' best practices. So it's more towards work methodologies and productivity, especially in software development teams. But what you see here is, in fact, you can apply this to any collaborative process, in fact. First of all, who am I? I'm João. I was born in the great year of 1984. I was born and I live and I've studied and I work in Lisbon, Portugal. And personally speaking, I have a wide array of interests. I use a fountain pen, I play the guitar, and I collect subway maps. Professionally speaking, I've done quite a different lot of things. I don't like to characterize what I do by a role or by a job title. So I like to solve real problems of real people using software as the main weapon. And so to do that along the history, I've done web development, I've taught, I've done research, and currently I'm a product manager at Premium Minds, a Portuguese software house, and I'm also a professor at the University Lusófona. At Premium Minds, I started as a developer, mainly back-end developer, and I still tinker with some stuff every now and then, but my main occupation now is product management. A warning, although the talk is about Trello, I'm not affiliated with Trello or with any entity I henceforth may mention. I don't even have a Trello t-shirt yet, but they could give me one for doing this. I'm just doing this because Trello is a nice tool. I wouldn't say it's good because the definition of good varies depending on what you want to do with it. For those who don't know, Trello is basically a tool based on the notion of moving cards between columns. Well, this is the basis of it. It has some add-ons, some more advanced features, but the main thing is lists and cards going through lists. This talk is not, I repeat, it's not about why use Trello, why not use Trello, Trello better than X, Y, Z, nothing of the sort, okay? This talk assumes that you are already okay and using Trello. Trello is nice. It's okay for non-development collaborative processes. For instance, onboarding. There was a talk earlier today in the stage about remote working. For instance, Trello could be good for a remote team to have a fluid onboarding process. It's okay for small projects, for small software development projects. I think there's a low threshold above which Trello starts not working. It's okay as an auxiliary coordination tool. For instance, you have a more complex tool to manage the progress of the project, but if you want to have coordination, for instance, with the paying client, you can have a Trello to synchronize. For instance, if you don't want or you can't give the client access to your development tool. And Trello is okay if it simply works for you, okay? It's cheap, aka free, and Trello has a nice thing. It has a good value for non-buck. The free version gives you a lot of stuff. So it's okay. And if it's okay to use Trello, let's presume you are using Trello and it's easy to use. But it's also easy to do it wrong. And this talk builds up from a very common anti-pattern I see every now and then, and which gives me the creeps, which is using labels for state. Okay? Labels are colorful, they are cute, it's very easy to want to use the label. Oh, okay, when I'm done, I'll put a green label, no worries. Yeah, worries. Labels suck at conveying state. Okay? They are colorful, they are nice, but they suck at conveying state, and namely at conveying state changes. Okay? Labels don't trigger notifications for people who are subscribed to a card. If people are subscribed to a card, there's a reason for that. They want to know what happens to that card. And you put a label saying done or saying needs validation, needs review, and people subscribe to the card know nothing about it. Okay? Another thing is Trello has this nice thing. When you enter Trello, you have all your boards shown, and the boards where you had activity have this nice indicator. So, in principle, this board you see here had some activity, and this board didn't, or did it. If you change the label, it doesn't show up here. You may have changed the label, you may have made an important state change, and it doesn't show up in the board's activity indicator. Another thing is history. Okay? With labels, you don't know when labels have changed. You don't know when a given transition happens. You don't know since when stuff is done, or since when stuff is waiting for a given step. Okay? And you also don't know the path through these changes. You don't know how long it took between the various stages of your process if you translate your process to Trello labels. Okay? So with labels, if you're trying to get any metrics from a board, for instance, burn down, lead time, etc., you don't. Okay? You know nothing of your past. Third, there's no accountability. I said you don't know when you changed the label, and you also don't know who changed the label. Okay? In some organizations, this is okay because there's shared responsibility, you're not micromanaging, etc. But on the one hand, there are organizations where this kind of control is desired, and there are some kind of processes where this kind of control is desired. For instance, you can have a more, let's say, bureaucratic relationship, for instance, with a client, and you have everything in the clear, and you know exactly who did what, when, so that when the proverbial excrement hits the fan, there's proof. Okay? So what to use instead of labels? Lists. Okay? There's not such a thing, there's no such thing as too many lists. Okay? It may seem overhead, but it's not. If it's a state, if it's something you need to know when happened, use a list. Okay? You can start with the basics, which is just that triptych, stuff to do, stuff that is being done, and stuff that has been done. You can never go wrong with this. Okay? And you can grow from here. You can break down your doing list into several doing lists according to your process. That's something I always emphasize when talk about this stuff. Don't look at this as, first of all, as lists or something. Look at this as steps in your process. Try to understand how your process works and then translate it to what the tools give you. And in this case, the right thing to translate your process's steps is lists, for the reasons I've mentioned. Okay? So in a software development, this can be development, code review, staging, quality assurance, etc. Okay? And then you're in a way, all these doing statuses are also done statuses. Why? Because if you are doing this, it means you have done this. So then you have every state is at the same time a doing state and a done state. It says you have done this, you are now doing this. And then at the end, you have a done state, okay? Which you might want to clean up every now and then, okay? And you can also, for instance, for Agile or for Scrum development processes, you can also break down your to-do list in several lists. For instance, your product backlog versus your sprint backlog, okay? If you have more fine-grained stuff, you can also use another cute thing that Trello has, which is checklists. It's also easy to abuse them, but it's less serious, okay? You can use checklists, for instance, for finer-grained state, okay? You can have a list you can have a subcomposition, a decomposition of your car, of your task or your story, and you can measure a finer grained state. You can track that progress using a checklist, okay? Nice thing, checklists also have history, okay? You have, as you can see here, you have a notion of when an item was checked as done. You have also a notion if it was unchecked again, and so on, okay? So for grocery list-like progress, you can use a checklist, or for instance for what I call here infrequent state, which is stuff that only applies to a few of your cards or a specific type of your cards, okay? So if only cards referring to, for instance, a deployment, if only those cards have this kind of state, you don't want to create a list called applying schema migrations, or a list called applying data migrations, because this will just be a list which will be empty most of the time and will just create noise. So for this, you can use a checklist inside the deployment card. So with all this, what are labels good for? As I said at the beginning, they are cute, they have names, they have colors, they are probably the first feature you have contact with when you begin using Trello. They must be good for something. I'd say that the main rule to use labels in Trello is use label for stuff that doesn't change much, okay? Because, as I said, labels don't go along well with change. Okay? So use them for stuff that doesn't change. And what is this? This is stuff like the type of card, if it's a bug, if it's a feature, if it's a task, etc. Okay? For these kinds of characteristics and emphasis, characteristics, you use a label. It's okay. Because stuff won't change from being a bug to being a feature, usually. You can also use labels for themes, for epics, or for product areas. There's an example from a colleague of mine called Daniel Zacarias. He has a great product management blog, Folding Burritos, and he has a lot of sample boards for product management, and this is an example of a roadmap board. And this is somewhere where it's nice to use labels to identify the product areas where to which each card refers to. Okay, this can be product areas. This can be KPIs, for instance. Given card, what's the KPI that it's thinking of improving, etc. Another aspect where you can use labels is criticality. Some may call this priority, but I prefer to call it criticality, because my personal opinion is that priority is a function of many stuff, among which criticality. For instance, this guy Justin Cohn, this is a link to a blog post, he proposes a 4-label system of criticality. So you use label to say something is a blocker, it's something that's blocking you from progressing, something without which you cannot release, something is a medium-sized annoyance, or just cosmetic stuff or a nice to have. Okay. Another option is using something like critical, major, minor, etc. Okay. Finally, another thing which is clever to do is to just mix and match these things I told up until now. So you can mix and match type with criticality and have a set of labels which are something is a feature, something is a chore, something is a bug, something is critical. Now we are all talking about criticality, or something is an epic. So you mix type of card with criticality. Okay, this is something related to 2 pet peeves of mine. So I deliberately usually do not call the red label urgent because of things. Okay, things are critical. If they are urgent, is a function of being critical plus some other things. And the bug label is deliberately not red, because not all bugs are critical, not all bugs are urgent. As you may know if you work in that area, or if you know a bit about the business, product management and project management is a lot about prioritizing, and prioritizing is about deciding what you do and what you don't do. Okay? So a bug is not necessarily a high priority thing. It can be just a little bug, and we can let it rest until the best time to tackle it comes along. So it's not red on purpose to not create unnecessary urgency. You can also mix and match type with theme, and you can unfold that epic label into which is the epic to which that car belongs. Okay, so and I'll show a little later how you can take advantage of this to see progress. Okay, so we have unfolded the label from this card is an epic to this card belongs to that epic. Okay, so in using this kind of rules of thumb, and these are only that rules of thumb. Okay, this is not science. This is not exact. This is my personal opinion and my personal advice, but an informed and supported by reason advice. What's in it for you by taking this advice? Notifications, as I've mentioned, people who follow a card get notified when stuff flows through your process. You have history, you have accountability, like I said, and you also have something very important when you are wanting to have a process that's agile and that's empiric, which is inspect to adapt. Okay? Agile processes are about adapting, but to adapt, you need to know where you're at. Okay? So for that, you need inspection, and lots of times that means metrics. Okay? So with this, you can use some tools. I'm using one. I'm showing this with one tool I know for the purpose, which is Trello, and it gives you some nice things extracted from your Trello boards. For instance, a backlog overview, and here you see how that mix and match with the epic labels comes into business, because you can measure progress to towards one of your product areas. Okay, you can see, for instance, for the better onboarding process, you can see how many stuff is in the backlog, how many is in progress, and an estimate of how many sprints or weeks or whatever is still due to complete that product area. You also have a cumulative flow diagram. Why? Because you have history about when each card traveled through the process. Okay, so this can give you an overview of how long stuff takes between being something that's required and being something that is done. Okay, and it also helps identifying bottlenecks in your process and stuff like that. Cycle time chart, more or less the same purpose. You can see how on average or in terms of percentile is your stuff taking, both in graph form and in numerical form. Here is that kind of stuff I was mentioning. You break down your doing state into various stages of doing / done, and you can take a look at this, and you can, for instance, identify that you have your biggest bottleneck, your stuff is taking more time in this fifth state, whichever it is. So, to sum up, yes, this is a quite short presentation. I prefer to leave some room for you to give also your insights and your questions about this. So to sum up, my advice, if you are already okay with using Trello for your process, which doesn't have to be a software development process, it can be just a collaborative process between people doing their things. Resist to use labels just because they're cute and colored. Sorry, too thirsty. So resist to use them only on the grounds of their cuteness and coloredness. And first, identify what is your workflow, what are the important steps of your workflow, and turn them into lists. If you have more little steps in your workflow or steps that only make sense in some cards, handle them with checklists. The main motto of this advice is use labels for stuff that doesn't change much. For instance, card type, theme / epic / product area / KPI you want to improve, criticality, or a mix among all these things. Okay? So related to this, you can read, in a few days, you can read the companion blog post of this talk, so with this content. And this is a set of articles about this and which were used as an inspiration and as the grounds to support all this advice. Some are posts about Trello, about Craveiro, and about product management in general. Okay, so thank you for your attention. I can now take your questions. I could have if you had them. You didn't have them, so fire away. Yeah. No mic? Yes. Yeah.
Is that okay, or should I change it to use labels of criticality? So normally I prioritize my actions or my to-do in more than one list, giving them some priorities as well. Is that bad? Is that good?
For those who didn't listen, the question is, so for his workflow, he uses multiple to-do lists, which represent criticality, and then use that to prioritize the order where you begin to do that. As I said, this is advice. Bottom line of all this is your mileage may vary. From my experience, the difficulties I had with those kinds of setups, and I already worked a couple of times with that, is that you lose the notion of priority among the things in those lists. Because usually, even if you organize, for instance, blockers in one list, annoyances in another list, and cosmetic stuff in another list, but that won't be the exact order. You are definitely not going to stick to blockers until you are out of blockers and then begin taking annoyances. You are probably going to prioritize along that. So especially when you have a bigger team, you need to have the priority clearly established. And in that way, you don't have the priority clearly established. For that scenario, I personally prefer to label the blockers as such, using labels, and to have only one list from which you draw work. And the order of stuff in that list is the priority, which can derive from criticality plus some other aspects. And that way, the other aspects that dictate priority are explicitly made visible into an ordered list, and one only ordered list. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. This is the bad experiences I had with that setup. Any other? Yes. Yes. Use the checklist inside the card to prioritize. But that's prioritizing inside. Prioritizing you can prioritize what's inside the card that way. But if you want to prioritize between cards, because each card represents a different feature of your product, it's basically. So what you're saying is have a card just for the priorities? Yeah. Yeah, but you're still going to have lists for the steps of your process, because checklists only give you two states: to do and done. And if it's a simple process, yes, I think that could work. If it's a software development process, that will quickly fall short because you are lacking the steps of the process. But it can also work. And it can also work as an auxiliary. I've seen this done too. It can work as an aid, for instance, if you have two boards. One where you manage the project and the roadmap, and another where the development process is done. So you can have on your roadmap a card which is just the set of features and have a checklist of which features compose that set, and you can cross them off, you can reorder them and manage the priority there, and then mirror it to the team by reordering the cards. So that can work too, yeah. Thanks. Yes? For documenting? Oh. Yeah. Okay, repeating the question because we're out of mic. What your name is? Oscar. What Oscar is asking is how about using Trello to document the project itself? It can work. Trello has some shortcomings related to that. For instance, there doesn't exist the notion of a unique and eternal identifier for a card. For instance, if your project becomes so complex that you want to have all that's done moved to another board, which is the archive board where you can use as documentation, the IDs, the only thing that exists as something close to an ID is changed when you move a card from a Trello board to another one. So for that, it's bad. But if you stick to one board, yes, that could work because mostly all the activity stays there. Comments, files, etc. And there's also some tools to connect Trello with source control tools. I think there's quite a good integration with GitLab. But then again, cards in Trello are not very good at being ID'd. So I guess the integration works well only one way. But it has that characteristic. You have all the historic. You have when things changed, so it can be a good aid to document a project. Oh, yes.
For you, when you feel the need to turn a checklist to a card?
That's a good question. So when does the need come, or when do I personally feel the need to turn a checklist into a set of cards? And by the way, Trello supports doing that swiftly. Checklist to a set of cards. Well, usually if your process is product-driven, it's difficult for that to happen because your card is either a feature, a bug, etc. So your checklists are usually developer tasks, and they don't get turned into cards. For instance, that can happen at one stage, I guess, which is you are doing the backlog grooming or planning with your team, and you start identifying steps for a given card, and then in the middle of that process, you realize that feature is too big to fit into a given time frame, a sprint, a week, a release or something. And so there comes a time where you split it. Otherwise, I don't see that happening a lot. Maybe among tasks, but it's the same things. For instance, you identify a task like, sorry. You identify a task like this one, for instance. Okay, you have Santa's reindeers who are affected by some problem with payments, and you start to identify this as one task, that is, investigate what happened, investigate those complaints. And you figure, okay, everything is the same, so it's one task, and these are just steps. But then you analyze this and you find out that each of these cases will take a long while to analyze. So again, each of these won't fit into a given timeline, and you want to track the progress of each one individually because some might be done now, some might be done later, etc. So that would be a stage where all these affected customers, each of their problems is big enough to become a task of its own right. Anyone else? Yes?
I have a problem when I say the moment that I stop using Trello is when it becomes too big.
Yeah.
And my question for you is, how do you control it? Manage less tasks?
Well, there are many approaches. Some of them are other people's approaches, which are very well documented and widespread. For instance, using multiple boards and having a separate board for dealing with the backlog and then a separate board dealing with the project itself, like I said a while ago. But in the end, I think there's a stage, like you said, when the project just becomes itself too big to remain on such a tool. I can't really give you a rule of thumb where I think that happens. Sometimes it's because the team becomes too big and consequently becomes a little segmented. And that's another shortcoming of Trello. You cannot use these little cute faces individually among tasks. Okay? You cannot say that someone is doing this and someone else is doing that. Okay? So when stuff becomes big, when the team becomes segmented, when you have lots of components in your product, that starts to work less well. So greater teams, greater products, a longer history of developing the product. For instance, I think one great moment where Trello starts being unnice is after the first time you get to production. Because Trello, there are some ways to do that, but managing releases and versions and that in Trello is a hack basically and doesn't work well. And for that there are much better tools. Okay, like I said, this Trello is okay if you are talking about a very well-contained scope, very controlled size and complexity of what you're managing here. And you have to be very bold, saying, okay, this is the point where Trello is not cutting it for me, because if you let it go, the pain will be bigger of migrating this to another place, and then you will lose a lot of information in the process. This was good. Reports.
Yes. So there is some here. You have backlog, in progress, and sprints complete. What is actually backlog?
Sorry?
What is backlog? What is in progress?
In this case, it's up to you to configure what is what. So when you set up this dashboard for one or more of your Trello boards, you check which of your lists constitute your backlog and which of your lists constitute your in-progress state.
Okay, so each column is a list. Each column is a list?
Each column is one or more lists.
Okay.
Okay. These are not list names. In Trello specifically, this will always be backlog and this will always be in progress, but you choose which lists count for each of those buckets, let's say.
Okay.
Yeah, but yes, this comes from lists. No more questions? Okay, so feel free to, if you bump into me there, to put more questions, and you can also hit me up on Twitter or check out my GitHub or contact me in any way you find appropriate. Okay, thank you for being here, thank you for your attention, thank you for your great questions.